I found out about Hollow Knight Silksong for the first time shortly after beating the original game back in 2020, and I was immediately enthralled. It seemed like such a cool concept to look forward to, and what little info I had raised so many questions. That said, there was one main question that stood out among all the rest. How could Christopher Larkin possibly recreate the success of the original soundtrack? Well, I'm happy to say that Christopher has not only pulled off a soundtrack that rivals the original, I think it might just surpass it. I won't definitively say that here, but what I will do is talk about every single track from the OST, ranking them all in order from the ones I like the least to my absolute favorites. I'll be making those judgments based off of my own personal experience, how much I enjoy re-listening to them, and how well it fits within the context of the game. I know a bit of music theory, but not enough to really be talking about it here, so I'll be mainly making my decisions based off of general vibes. I don't really have specific criteria. There are 53 tracks to talk about, so we got a long ways to go. But before we start, real quick, I do have 4 important points to make. First of all, this should be obvious, but spoiler warning. I'll be talking about my personal experience with music that's spread throughout every part of the game, so nothing is off limits. I'll be talking about nearly every single boss and area. Secondly, I want to say that this is my own personal subjective opinion about which tracks I'm enjoying more at this point in time. The soundtrack is so well-rounded that I genuinely think you could make a solid argument for nearly every single one of the 53 tracks to be your own personal favorite, and in order for me to put my favorites at the top, I'll inevitably have to put some of yours more towards the bottom. Feel free to let me know where I messed up in the comments anyways though. Third, I did this style of video a few years ago ranking the first game's soundtrack, and I had a lot of comments from people that were super upset about how I missed songs, including the Path of Pain music or the Abyss theme. I want to clarify now that I am only ranking the official OST released by Christopher Larkin. That means no Sherma song, no chakra singing, etc, etc. Sorry, but maybe I'll talk about those some other day. And finally, if you enjoy the content that I make, subscribing helps the channel out a lot. Maybe wait to see my ranking first, but I just had to throw that in there. Anyways, enough of this intro, let's get right into track 53. Before all the Underworks fans out there get mad at me, one track had to be last, and this just happens to be that track in my list. I actually think it does do a great job at accomplishing the oppressed, sinister vibe that it's going for, and that helps to create an environment that feels seedy and uncomfortable, like you're seeing the dirty work behind the scenes that makes the Citadel tick. That said, when I'm comparing a track that makes me feel uncomfortable versus a track that sounds beautiful and wondrous, I'm gonna end up preferring the latter. So Underworks is unfortunately gonna be that track that gets looked over and put down on the bottom once again. Kinda funny how that works out. The Slab is getting placed close to the bottom of my list for nearly identical reasons to Underworks, but I do have a kinda cool story about this track. The other day, I was at the climbing gym talking to a friend of mine about how I was trying to rank all these tracks from Silksong and how difficult it was. One thing led to another, and I ended up playing him some of the music. As a bit of an experiment, I decided to play him the theme from the Slab and have him guess what he thought it sounded like. This is a guy that's never played Hollow Knight and knows basically nothing about Silksong, and yet his exact words after hearing it for about 30 seconds were, I don't know, like a jail cell or a prison. The Slab is getting ranked 52nd on my list because I just like how the other tracks sound more, but it has the exact effect that Christopher Larkin is going for. The fact that someone who isn't particularly into soundtracks and has no prior knowledge of Silksong can guess that specific environment from the music alone is evidence enough of how impressive this OST is. Reprieve is a track that's unique to Act 3, and it's a slight variation on the theme that plays when you're in a beltway, a safe place where you won't take damage, and you can just chill. I don't have any problems with this track at all. In fact, I absolutely love the atmosphere and the calm that it creates, but it can get just a little bit repetitive. The real reason that it's this low is it simply doesn't do enough for me to earn a spot above anything else in the soundtrack. Repose is the track that plays in place of Reprieve for Acts 1 and 2, and it's placed down here for basically the same reasons as its counterpart. It's a little bit more upbeat and almost hopeful, and I think I like that energy a bit more, so that's why it gets the nod this time. Again, I do like both of these tracks a lot, but when it comes down to it, they just don't really stack up against anything else in the soundtrack for me. As insane as it is, now with 49 tracks to go, we've reached the point where just about any track could replace another on a given day for me. Sands of Karak was such a cool area to discover, and its music fits perfectly with its almost alien choral wasteland vibe that it's got going on. I keep on doing this thing where I listen to this track and I decide that I should put it higher, and then I listen to some of the other ones in front of it and I realize that, no, it probably should just stay where it is. The song is as barren as the location it's designed for at times, and then it hits you with these beautiful reverberating notes, and the lines on the piano and strings that feel both tranquil and alive at the same time. Sands of Karak is a beautiful piece of music, but not quite enough to earn a spot higher than 49th. Sinner's Road is a track that sounds, well, sinister. It has rattling percussion that help to create a feeling of uneasiness, and I love the melodies that it brings in with seamless transitions between various woodwinds. It features these booming hits on some sort of a bass drum as well that keep driving the piece forward and give some weight to it, and I think it does a really good job at scoring a location that seems meant for outcasts from the high society of the Citadel. All that said, it doesn't leave that much of a lasting impression on me compared to most of the other tracks in the OST. I'm gonna be perfectly honest, if I had just looked up a tutorial on how to get through the mist on my first playthrough, I think I may have ultimately ranked this track much higher up my list. Its first impression is really cool, utilizing the organ in this somber way while creating an incredibly spooky atmosphere reminiscent of Soul Sanctum from the original game. Unfortunately for its place on my rankings, I did not look up a tutorial for The Mist, so I heard this track looped for about 45 minutes as I tried all sorts of different combinations and ideas, trying to figure out how to escape the mist and what was going on with different room transitions. By the time that I'd finally made it out, I had heard the track loop so many times that, while I thought it was an amazing puzzle, I was just a little bit tired of the music and location as a whole. In my opinion, the Mist track ends up being just a little bit repetitive, and if you listen to the official version in isolation, it's clearly the first half of a larger piece that has a full build-up. The second half of the piece is where all that tension gets released, and you'll be hearing me talk about that track much later on in this list. In 46th place, we have our first boss theme, Cut Through. This track runs into the same issue of being a little bit too repetitive for me, although I do think that the repetitiveness was probably an intentional choice to build up the tension. It combines horns and strings and a choir all into one constantly building feeling of intensity that is absolutely befitting of the bosses it gets assigned to. I do have to come clean here though. I think the real reason this is my least favorite boss theme might have to do with those very bosses it gets assigned to. Disgraced Chef Lugoli, Broodmother, Crawfather, these are all bosses in rooms that ended up feeling a little bit tedious for me in one way or another, and having a track that felt like it was just constant prolonged tension at those moments didn't really make it any better. That's not to say I didn't enjoy those fights or rooms at all, and I do think that the song is a banger, but compared to the experiences offered by other bosses and tracks, it just doesn't quite stack up. It is once again that time. I'm ranking the track that is literally the name of the game close to the bottom. I know, there are some people out there that'll have this as their favorite one in the entire OST, but I'm not one of those people. For me, there are some games that have title tracks that steal the show, and you want to just sit at the menu and listen for a while because they're so beautiful or catchy. An example in this very genre is Ori and the Will of the Wisps. The title theme has a full build-up, beautiful singing, and is one of my favorite tracks in the whole game. Silksong doesn't follow that approach, and I don't think it's a problem at all. It is a great menu theme, but it doesn't really steal the show over the rest of the OST, so I can't justify placing it any higher than it is currently. The Marrow is a foreboding track that feels majestic, heavy, and powerful. I think in any other game, the Marrow could be this iconic late-game location set in the heart of a volcano or deep underground or some other hard-to-access place. So hearing this track and finding such an insane-looking area so early on really sets the tone for Silksong as a whole. There are these big drum hits again in the background that you can almost feel in your chest with good headphones, and the strings and choir combine to create this incredibly dramatic piece of music. I think the reason I put it so low on this list is because I tend to favor tracks with more of a distinct melody, and this one feels more like a soundscape to me. It is very cool, but on my list specifically, it's not going to get past 44th. Mount Fei takes us to a completely different section of the map, and it takes on the idea of creating a texture and atmosphere in a different way as well. This time around, we don't have any booming, foreboding drums. In fact, we don't have any drums at all. Instead, there's this repeated pizzicato played, which are short plucked notes from string instruments if you don't know, and a swelling ambiance creating a landscape of sound that fits Mount Fei so well. This area reminded me of Celeste so much that I was a little bit put off by the lack of inspirational electronic music to hype me up the mountain, but the track that we actually got made the whole thing feel so much more grand and almost regal. It gave me the sense that this mountain has been here long before Farloom, and it'll be here long after as well. This is the track that plays during the credits after the main ending from Act 3, and it is stunningly beautiful. It's quiet yet powerful with the emotions that it brings out as you process the insane ending you just witnessed and come to terms with the fact that you officially beat the game. That said, in my own playthrough, most of my emotions were coming from the experience of the game itself, and this track didn't quite steal the show in any significant way for me. I think it might have gotten the short end of the stick, because the track that plays for the ending of Act 2 had a much stronger effect on me, and it might be impacting the way I see this one, but we'll talk about that much later on. For now, let's move on to track 41. Farfields is another area theme from the lower portion of the map, and it continues to use these repeating, almost timpani-sounding drums in the background. I'm not exactly sure what drums they are, but the effect that they add is this driving force that pushes you along, similar to a slow-paced marching beat. The track blends so many beautiful elements, but my favorite part of it without a doubt is about 1:50 seconds in, when this stunning horn line takes over and steals the show. I love this line so much that it helps put Farfields a little bit ahead of the previous tracks. Red Memory is a track that plays during one of the most important moments of the entire game, from both a lore standpoint and a gameplay standpoint. This is the track of Hornet's backstory and her life, and to me it feels so raw and emotional, using a smaller palette of instruments and sounds to create a pretty special feeling. I think it does exactly what it needs to for the moment in-game, but it doesn't really work for me as well on a re-listen, so it can't make it above the other tracks that do. We've arrived at the next boss theme of the video, Dark Descent. This one takes a little while to get going in the official version, with about 40 seconds of muted void sounds building up to the main part of the track, but once it does get going, it sounds insane. This track is incredibly intense, which makes perfect sense, as it plays when you're fighting the various void enemy arenas, and more notably, Lost Garment. It features these gritty, grating strings, and I think the fact that this whole album was recorded by professional musicians is really evident in the sound quality here. There's a good argument to be made for Dark Descent getting placed much higher, but for me, the 40 seconds of build-up does take away from it a bit, and again, the rest of this OST is just really damn good. Everything that I said a while earlier about the Marrow and Farfields can be fully applied to Deep Docks and then some. Deep Docks takes that late game feeling intense lava-filled vibe and then completely expands on it with a hammering sound in the background, adding an industrial feel alongside. The addition of an epic choir and an even heavier drumline pushing things along only adds to it all. In my opinion, this track is a masterclass on how to use music to create a full sense of immersion. Deep Docks is an area that should be awe-inspiring, and this music does a really excellent job at pulling that off and making you feel small in comparison. I also really appreciate the fact that this is a 3-minute track that manages to continue developing almost the entire time and avoid feeling as repetitive as some of the tracks mentioned previously. Sister Splinter is as close as we're gonna get to Nosk musically from the original Hollow Knight. It starts out with this uneven feeling beat and an unsettling drone that builds up to the main melody, but the part that steals the show for me once it drops is the bass. The sound design here is crazy, as every note the bass plays feels like a heavy impact that jolts you awake if you weren't already. It has this really unique sound that stands out from the rest of the OST because of how different it is, but it is also really short, and the lack of development after the first couple ideas makes me have a hard time putting it higher up than it currently stands. Incisive Battle starts pretty slow as far as a boss or arena theme goes, but it ends up developing into a really interesting track. Once it gets going, there's a brilliant contrast between the solo melody on the violin, which sounds incredible in its own right, and then this lower rippling line that creates a super unique effect and stood out a lot to me. Ideas like this one tend to end up running through my head even after I haven't listened to the track for a while, and they definitely help certain tracks stand out on my list. Incisive Battle is pretty short and doesn't make an appearance in any super major story moments I can remember, but I do really like that one part with contrasting lines in the lower and upper octaves, and that's enough to earn a spot at 36th. Fourth Chorus is one of the first bosses that you encounter in Silksong, and it also happens to be one of the most cinematic and epic fights in the whole game. Christopher Larkin has to find this tricky balance, where the game just started, so you don't really need this piece to sound super emotional or world-changing, but the boss is also huge, and it is an incredibly cinematic arena that you're fighting in, so a track like Incisive Battle that we just talked about won't really do the trick. I think he's done really well to find this balance of a full orchestral sound, with the choir, strings, and horns working together and creating a massive feeling atmosphere, while also not really doing anything more than it needs to. There's a great build-up, and at times, it reminds me of some of the tracks from God Home in the original Hollow Knight. It's far from my favorite boss theme in the game, but I do think that it really added to one of the most exciting moments at the beginning of Act 1. I don't know how universal this experience was, but Blasted Steps was one of the first areas that I encountered in Silksong that I genuinely had no idea about at all. I didn't remember seeing anything in the trailers, I'd gotten no spoilers, and I was playing through blind, so stumbling into this sand-swept, ancient place at the edge of the kingdom was one of the coolest early moments in the game for me. Between the sandworms and the constant wind, the Trisnits from Sands of Karak, and the judges still standing proud despite their failing kingdom, this area felt to me like it was its own little world, isolated from the rest of the game. The track Blasted Steps manages to encapsulate all of that, and it feels completely timeless to me in a way that's hard to quantify. For whatever reason, it actually reminds me a lot of Skyrim, with music more on the ambient side, but still with a really distinct character to it. I think it's really effective being a little bit different from the rest of the OST. Going all the way back to the second boss that you encounter in the game, Bellbeast is a surprising banger in my opinion. Hearing this track without a bunch of bells clanging all around is a bit off-putting, but the melody that it plays with the low brass is exciting and catchy, and I just think all the different parts complement each other really well. It has a lot of energy, but doesn't really feel like you're fighting something that's evil. It just feels like a challenge and a thrilling little battle. It's perfect for a fight that you encounter so early on, while not being too overwhelming. I don't have anything more to say or a super articulate way to put it, but I just like the vibe of this theme a lot. Going straight back into the Blasted Steps, Last Judge is one of those tracks that I think could have made it into my top 10, but this is where a ranking video in this way starts to get super difficult. I really feel like every track from this point on also has an argument for top 10, so it all just comes down to personal preference. This track is incredibly exciting, builds well, and has a lot of cool ideas going on. There's a sound effect of perhaps a hammer hitting an anvil that persists throughout almost the entire track that I love. And yet again, Christopher Larkin has managed to tie in a full orchestral sound, with horns, percussion, strings, and a choir, and all of it blends together seamlessly. Recording real instruments and pulling off something like this is hard enough to find in a game soundtrack in general, much less an indie, and it really brings this theme alive. The main thing that I don't like as much in this track is this moment where they have these descending lines and then silence for a second. It produces a cool effect, but in my opinion, it also kills a little bit of the momentum that the track has. On one hand, I feel like who am I to criticize a guy like Christopher Larkin? I'm sure he had a good reason for it, but on the other hand, that part just didn't work quite as well for me as the rest of it. Either way, it is still a suitably epic theme for one of the coolest fights in the game. For track 31, we're going even further back this time to the very first boss of the entire game. Strive doesn't have that full orchestral sound, it's all about the strings, but I think that gives it a really fun, light feeling. The solo violin part sounds absolutely incredible, and the whole track just sounds like it's floating. There's a reason Team Cherry used this track for a trailer. I think it really shows the difference between this game and the first Hollow Knight musically. In the first game, the opening boss theme of False Night sounds intense and heavy, and it sets a bit of a darker tone with slamming percussive sounds that fit alongside these rushing whimsical lines. In Strive, the rushing whimsical lines take center stage, and the whole theme just feels incredibly bright in a way that sets the tones for the early parts of the game. Strive manages to sound both complex and simple at the same time in different ways, and for me, it really elevated that simple first boss of Moss Mother in a way that only great music can. Staying down here at the bottom of the map, we got Moss Grotto, the theme for the opening area of the game. I think this does a really good job at creating a launch-off point for the rest of Farlu, giving you a false sense of happiness before you realize how messed up this kingdom actually is. I used the word whimsical while I was describing Strive, and I think that's the perfect way to describe Moss Grotto as well. I'm a big sucker for woodwinds in general, so the oboe that kicks off the melody sounds so great to me, and I love when the flute comes in for the second half of the track as well. Overall, I'd say that this theme doesn't do anything too crazy, but it just has an immaculate fairy tale-esque vibe to it that is executed to perfection, earning its spot in the top 30. I had such a hard time deciding between Moss Grotto and Shellwood when I was figuring out my initial rankings. Shellwood goes for some similar ideas, but it ends up feeling a bit more mysterious and wild, with some more depth to it. I think at the end, the reason that I liked Shellwood a little bit more comes down to that extra bit of depth and development that it has going on. It's definitely not a direct comparison, but in my mind, if Moss Grotto feels similar to Greenpath from the first game, then Shellwood is similar to Queen's Gardens. Just a little bit more going on, but both are fantastic themes that give so much life to their own unique areas. When I listen to the choir, I get flashbacks of this arena at the bottom of High Halls, and I immediately have negative thoughts. I was tempted to just make a snap judgment and rank this one pretty low without giving it a fair chance, but then when I really listened to the full track, I was surprised to hear a lot more than I remembered. It starts off on the front foot, with racing strings in the back, before adding in the choir, which is obviously the feature. Before too long, these triumphant horns get mixed in with even more strings and that classic running bass line that Christopher Larkin loves. The more that I listened, the more I got this sense of heartbreak and tension with the choir in a way that seemed almost over the top for the arena battle that it's used in. Because of this, I looked through my footage a little bit, and I realized that there is another really important place this theme is used, and that's when it clicked. The battle against the second Sentinel is where that theme of a tense, reluctant fight comes in, and it fits this track so well. This isn't usually my favorite type of sound that Christopher Larkin goes for, but I do really enjoy it in this case, and now I just think of this as the de facto second Sentinel theme. Crust King Khan is one of the most complicated themes from the entire Silksong soundtrack, playing in this crazy meter with a repeated figure in the bass almost the entire time. I put this a little bit lower than you might expect, but I do think that it easily had the potential to be in my top 5 songs from the OST. Unfortunately, my absolute favorite part of the track didn't get expanded on very much, so for me, it starts to feel repetitive very quickly. If you skip to this part a minute 15 seconds in, Christopher Larkin starts to expand on the main melodic idea in this amazing, heroic way, and it sounds so good to me, but it just goes right back to the previous idea almost immediately before the track ends. It's still a really cool concept, but I would love to hear a version of the track that continues that development a little bit more. And like I said, I think that would end up being one of my absolute favorites. We are officially past the halfway point in the soundtrack, and I think there's no better way to start off the back half than with the boss theme for our main protagonist, Hornet herself. Red Maiden plays in the slab, and more specifically, during one of my favorite moments from the entire game. When I was doing my blind playthrough and realized that we were about to be above the room where I'd seen these flies take Hornet's needle and cloak, I actually said out loud that it would be so sick if we dropped into the room and took our stuff back. Hornet did more than that. She broke the guy's neck and then started a boss fight where she is the boss. This track plays with some of the ideas from Hornet's original Hollow Knight theme, and I think that the moment that it's played in just elevates it so much. I keep on repeating myself, but this one was really tempting to throw higher up on the list. Not quite tempting enough though. Clover Dancers is a track that could have benefited so much from being developed a little bit more. It takes the theme from the Cogwork Dancers and it makes it sound elegant and beautiful, where the first one sounded robotic like a wind-up theme. That's obviously an intentional choice, but it made me like the first minute of Clover Dancers quite a bit more than Cogwork Dancers. Despite that, you might have noticed that the Cogwork version has not been mentioned yet, meaning that it's ranked higher than this, and that is because, unfortunately, after the first minute of Clover Dancers, the track ends. It starts off so strong, but then right when I want it to hit a second gear and go into a new phase that feels even more dramatic and heartbreaking, it just stops. Ironically, the reason that it isn't making it any higher than 25th is just because I wanted more of it, and that lack of more phases in the music or fight was really the only problem that I had. It shouldn't be a huge surprise to see this as the next track, as I rate it really similarly to Clover Dancers in a lot of ways. Like I said, I'm not as big of a fan of the first phase of this theme, but as it progresses and gets more and more emotional and dramatic, I think it reaches a totally different level. For me, the real exciting part of the track that I love starts with the third phase, a little over a minute in. It brings a totally different level of energy, with racing horns, strings, and that constant ticking sound pushing the tempo. Christopher Larkin throws the melody around from instrument to instrument at a frenetic pace, sounding almost out of control and desperate before we reach that devastating final phase with just one of the dancers remaining. For a mere imitation of the Princes of Redania, it's a little funny to me how much more exciting the music ended up being in the end. Taking a step in a completely different direction, in 23rd we have Whispering Vaults. As far as area themes go, this one has it all. More than ever, this ranking is just getting decided by vibes at this point, because I think that the melodic ideas and execution of this whole track in general are done perfectly. This is a 10 out of 10 track for me straight up, S tier on a tier list. Unfortunately, from now on, all the rest of the tracks are as well, for their own various reasons. Whispering Vaults feels a little mysterious, a little eerie, but a little magical too. The hammering bell sound that persists throughout the track just adds to that feeling, and I love the way the choir is subtly layered in, constantly supporting the melody, and just adding so much texture to the track as a whole. You can hear the benefit of live musicians throughout the whole OST, but this was another instance where I think it really stands out. It has been a long time since The Mist, but we have finally made it to that second half that I was talking about. Phantom takes all of those creepy feelings and that tension that was building up and releases it all at once in this thrilling theme. The organ makes you feel like it's reminiscent of Grimm for a second, but where Grimm goes into rock, Phantom goes full orchestra mode, with the horns and strings all united in this ecstatic rush. It manages to keep you right on the edge of your seat for one of the most exciting bosses in the game, and this was one of those moments in my playthrough where I just took a second to note how incredible the music sounded while I was fighting Phantom. It's a cool song, that's all there is to say. In a complete 180 thematically, next up we're going back to the Citadel with High Halls. Right off the bat, this is the type of track that gets stuck in my head. It's simple, but I love the sound of the harp, and it feels so tranquil and relaxing. That's before the melody comes in too. I think it's an oboe at first, then joined by a flute, and they just blend right in so well. This is a perfect example of Christopher Larkin not overcomplicating the instrumentation and making something absolutely beautiful. As far as I'm aware, there's just 3 instruments on this track, and yet it works so well, even better than a lot of the tracks with a full orchestral feel. High Halls does the simple things to perfection, and makes the complicated things, like its intertwining melody, sound simple. And we're right back to cinematic. Taking 20th place, we have Enter Farloom, which was first heard back in 2019 with Silksong's original announcement trailer. At the time, I thought it might just be trailer music, similar to how Enter Hallownest was just used for Hollow Knight's trailer years before. That turned out to not be the case. Enter Farloom plays as we climb from the abyss near the beginning of Act 3, in one of the most dramatic and exciting moments from the entire game, and the payoff to hear this track in a pivotal moment was absolutely euphoric. Or it would have been if I stopped taking damage and restarting this track from a less exciting point. That's right, baby. We're coming back. You thought you were done with us. Kingdom thought that it was over. They're not ready. Okay. Genuinely, I think my experience listening to this got massively damaged by my own inability to platform. The music kept building up and calming down over and over again, and then the hype moment got a little bit messed up. Even still, the idea that they were going for was evident, and this track is still incredible in my opinion. Particularly this moment about a minute in. It's just absolutely insane composing from Christopher Larkin. The way he tosses the different parts between instruments sounds amazing, and this is what I'm talking about when I say I want some tracks to be developed some more with even more ideas. He's making such good stuff, I just want more. A little while back, when I was talking about the track titled Silksong, I mentioned the game Ori and the Will of the Wisps. Lost Redania gives me such strong Ori vibes as well, but of course in Christopher Larkin's signature style. It starts out with that beautiful singing melody, but before too long, it branches out to different instruments, with a violin and later a flute. To me, it sounds like a track from Ori mixed with the same musical texture as Green Path. It sounds magical, whimsical, mystical, another word that ends with coal, and sacred. Like we're stepping foot in a place that shouldn't be disturbed, and we should feel honored just to be there. Lost Redania is one of the most special feeling locations in the game, and I'm happy to say that this track absolutely does it justice. When I did my ranking of the Hollow Knight OST a couple years ago, I would often put the slower paced themes pretty far down, with the reasoning that they were less exciting and there wasn't enough going on. In the time since then, the way I think about soundtracks has completely changed, and I think Greymoor is a great example of a track that isn't really exciting per se, but is an absolute masterclass on how to give an area life through music. This is one of the most immersive atmospheres in the entire game, and I think it's the type of track that only is going to grow on people more with time. Most of it is ambient and melancholic, with a heavy focus on strings, and it all works together to create that deep sense of immersion. It keeps basically the same energy the entire time, but don't mistake that for a lack of development. This is a 4-minute theme chock full of different melodic ideas that are happening throughout and getting expanded on. This style may not be as catchy as some of the other tracks, but when done well, it's the type of thing that makes certain areas feel absolutely iconic, and it's the type of thing that'll make Greymoor synonymous with Silksong in years to come. Speaking of tracks that grow on people as time passes, Bellheart started out as a theme that I just thought was kinda cool. I like the concept of the bells and chime sounding, but I didn't really think much of it as I was playing the game. Now, after playing through Act 3 and having that theme removed from Bellheart, I realize how much it does for the atmosphere. I'm genuinely attached to it so much now because of the safe space that Bellheart becomes, and it went from being just a cool theme to a favorite of mine. That's not to discredit the actual music itself either. The melody is simple, but solemn and hopeful at the same time. It layers in the string and piano melody together so well, and the bells add a huge amount of texture. I love the fact that we got a unique theme for each of the different towns throughout the game, because they are all so good. Tormented Trabio is a theme that feels way more dramatic than it should be in theory. You'd think that you're fighting one of your allies turned into a terrifying monster or something. It's haunting and so intense. Then you remember you're fighting Trabio, the guy who did this when you beat him the first time, and you realize actually it's perfect. I think if you listen to the soundtrack blind, with no knowledge of who Trabio is, you'd think he has some terrible arc, and this is an incredible moment of conflict for him as a grand finale. But I love the fact that we only see him twice, and the void just made him even more of a drama queen the second time. The theme itself is insane though. This is some Dark Souls stuff right here, and I absolutely love it. It expands on the theme from the first Trabio encounter, and turns it into this insane, powerful, tormented version. Brilliant writing from Christopher Larkin again. He just lets loose with this one. Going back to another theme that gives you a complete sense of immersion, Clockwork Core is just a really cool sounding track that fits the area that it's in seamlessly. The track manages to find that perfect combination of sounding mechanical, like clockwork, and also having a distinct melody full of wonder and intrigue. I played through this area before the first patch, so all the gears did 2 damage. Let me tell you, this track was the saving grace for my sanity. If it was anything less than a banger, I would have completely crashed out. Fortunately, it is indeed a banger, and I couldn't imagine Clockwork Core with a different theme now. I know this is a lot of people's favorites, but sorry guys, I just don't like it quite enough to dethrone the rest of the top 15. Last Dive is in the game for one single moment, but it just so happens that that single moment is one of the most powerful, tension-filled moments from the whole game. As Hornet dives into the void with the Everbloom and we get this crazy cutscene, it gave me flashbacks of the trailer music, and to say that it hit differently would be an understatement. In the actual game, we only get to hear a fraction of the full track, and it was still more than enough to give me chills. The thing that really separates this track from a lot of the rest of the OST is how re-listenable it is. I could crank the volume on it and listen all the way through, just thinking about that whole build-up from the trailer through the rest of the game, all culminating in this final moment, and replicate that feeling of chills almost every time. I think it could stand out a little bit more, if not for the track that plays right after, which, in my opinion, is one of the greatest pieces that Christopher Larkin has ever written. We'll talk plenty about that later, though. Out of every track in the entire OST, I think Hunter's Trail is the one that grew on me the most over time. On my first listen, I'm sure I would have liked it and had a lot of different thoughts. Unfortunately, I was too distracted dying over and over again because I hadn't learned how to play the game yet. It took a lot of time for improvement and a trip back way later in the game for me to finally start appreciating how amazing this theme really is. I've been trying to do a good job explaining every track and my reasoning behind my ranking for it, but this one is a little bit hard to quantify for me. I think it just blends together really well and does a great job at capturing that tucked away but still wild and mysterious element of Hunter's March. Ultimately, I just like the vibe that it has. I could re-listen to it over and over again, and I don't see that opinion changing anytime soon. Bone Bottom is one of 2 tracks released in 2019 as a teaser for the Silksong OST, and at the time, I thought it was nice. Relaxing, ambient music that brings another melancholic, peaceful vibe, but I wasn't really sure where it would go in the final game. Almost immediately after starting my first playthrough, I'd get my answer. Bone Bottom is Silksong's version of Dirtmouth, and while it may not initially seem as iconic as its predecessor, it has grown on me so much since I heard it for that first time years ago. The thing that I think the Bone Bottom theme does even better than Dirtmouth, and better than Bellheart, that other village theme I mentioned earlier, is it has this sense of progression that you might not expect in a little village at the bottom of Farloom. It starts out solemn, but by the time that you've made it halfway through the track, it starts to feel more and more hopeful, and you kind of get the sense that Hornet is the one bringing that hope in such difficult times. It has a surprising emotional impact for me, and while it's not at the very top of my ranking, it absolutely deserves this high of a placement. Awakening is everything that you'd expect from the theme of a final boss in a Team Cherry game. It has that 50-second build-up similar to the Hollow Knight theme, and then it absolutely explodes. This theme has so much weight, with the choir, strings, and percussive hammering sounds all coming together. The horns play their part, and the theme just builds and builds, with Christopher Larkin having a field day with all these different dramatic ideas. This track is one of the fullest sounding in the game, and it fits the moment so well. With all that said, it doesn't quite make it into my top 10 because, for whatever reason, it just didn't hit that hard for me on the re-listen. I'm having a hard time articulating what it is, and maybe I'm being a little bit too harsh, but for some of the tracks in this OST, I could put them on loop, or listen every day for days in a row and still be absolutely loving them. For Awakening, I have it really high up, because for me, this is one of the most impressive sounding tracks in the entire game, but I just don't enjoy it enough personally, as much as the rest of the tracks remaining. To kick off that top 10, we have Nihilith. Straight up, this is the most emotional track in the game. There are others that hit hard, but none harder than this theme, and a big part of that is this guy. If you don't know, Seth is a character that was created by a young boy named Seth who loved Hollow Knight and was battling cancer, and he got the opportunity to meet Team Cherry and talk to them. Team Cherry gave him the chance to create a character to add into the game, and now, even after his passing, he lives on through his character Seth in Silksong. Keeping that in mind, the battle against Seth really pulled at the old heartstrings for me, and this theme is so powerful and emotional that it just added so much to it. The juxtaposition of a character as badass as Seth's, with music so heavy and emotional, makes it only hit harder. The fight against Nihilith herself was cool too, but Seth completely stole the show here, and when the second phase of this track comes in, oh man, I was going through it. Based on the metrics that I've been using so far as well, this track is absolutely re-listenable, and I find myself singing along with it after every listen. It's just another one of Christopher Larkin's masterpieces. If I was forced to use a single word to describe the track Fleetopia, I think the word that I'd use is cozy. This track just makes me smile. I can't express how much I love both the area and the atmosphere that this track helps to create. The melody is catchy and fun. The beat persisting in the background keeps everything floating, and there are these little interjections from all kinds of instruments throughout the entire piece that give it so much life. This is a track that you'll hear me use all the time in my future videos, I'm sure, and is absolutely the type of music that I'll be listening to in my free time fairly often as well. After all the stress that BioWater creates, having a haven like this to arrive at is one of the most relieving moments in the entire game, and the music is another huge contributing factor to that. Enough with that fun, cozy nonsense though, let's get to a real banger of a track. Widow just slaps. It's exciting, tense, and manages to put the pressure on you without feeling overwhelming or too heavy in any way. The melody is so catchy. I had a night shortly after I beat First Sinner where I was playing some board games with my friends, and I swear I probably was singing the main melody of Widow every minute or two for about 3 hours straight. It got absolutely stuck in my head, and I wasn't even mad about it. The background of this track is constantly driving it forward. The melody is amazing, as I already said, and the track is already one of the best boss themes in the entire game after the first minute. Then you hit the second phase, where it goes up to a higher key and layers on even more intensity, and it just feels so insane. I beat Widow fairly quickly in my first playthrough, so when I realized that they had reused the theme for First Sinner, I was absolutely delighted. First Sinner took me a lot longer, maybe a bit too long, but the music is so good that I wasn't even tired of it a little bit by the time I finally took the boss down. Out of every track in the game, Widow might be the one that gets me the most hyped up and ready to take on a sick boss, and that is exactly what it did for me. Lace is just an incredible track. This song was the second one previewed along with Bone Bottom in 2019, and back then, I already thought that it was one of my favorite tracks from Christopher Larkin, period. The level has gone up so far throughout this OST, but despite that, Lace still contends, and it's up there with some of the best tracks in the game. It's a whirlwind of strings, and it brings so much energy to both of the boss encounters that it features in. There's this triumphant, bright, exciting melody that's brought out by the higher strings, and then this powerful counter melody that completely keeps you on your toes, something very befitting of the boss that it's assigned to. This theme works perfectly as a foil to Hornet in general. Really similar in terms of sound design and energy of what you'd expect from a main character, but with its own unique melody and ideas. I think that the song would be incredible regardless of its context in the game, but it being assigned to fights as cool as the ones with Lace are just the cherry on top. In terms of replayability, you don't get much better than this track either. I've been replaying it for years already, and it only went up in my view with the release of Silksong. Overall, this is an elite theme on every level, and if you say it's your personal favorite, I'd have no issues. For me, it's good enough to comfortably make the top 10, but no further than this, as there are still just a few that clear it. After all that talk about Lace, the track to beat it and take 6th is the theme for a dramatic little bug who wins based off of vibes alone. Trabio is a track that immediately caught my ear, and it is still so much fun to listen to every single time. It's exciting, light, and incredibly catchy. I have very little analysis for this one. I just think the choice of a bright sounding piano that dances around in the higher octaves of the instrument was a great decision to open the track. From there, it just develops through all sorts of different ideas before falling right back on the main melody like it never left. This is one of Christopher Larkin's finest. If a melody like this was in a big budget movie production, I wouldn't bat an eye. In fact, it might even stand out. You've done Trabio proud, Chris. We're down to the final 5, and it starts out with what might be one of the more controversial picks on my list. I haven't seen much hype for Songclave Online, but man, this one hits just as hard for me as anything else in the entire OST. It was already a standout favorite of mine just from its place in the Citadel alone, but then it played during that first credit roll at the end of Act 2, and I had chills the entire time. This is a perfect example of a track that's kept relatively simple and straightforward, but carries so much emotion and feeling behind it. From the second that opening arpeggio starts, it just pulls you in, and then that bright piano sound that I loved from Trabio comes in and plays this beautiful melody that's just absolutely captivating. When previous tracks have been shorter, I've criticized a lack of development, but that's not the case for this one. I don't think it needs to be any longer than it is, and it develops plenty in the minute and a half that it has, building with all sorts of different instruments playing on that original melodic idea. This is the type of track that I feel like I could listen to in a bunch of different contexts. On one hand, I could passively listen as I try to study or fall asleep, and just enjoy how relaxing the theme is. On the other, I could actively listen and imagine the whole journey these pilgrims of Farloom have gone through and that little spark of hope that Hornet has given them. And if I choose the second option, I just get chills all over again. Truly the mark of a great theme. If Songclave may have been a surprise to some people, Bilewater should be anything but. This is one of the most stunning themes in the entire game, partially because the area that it's in would seem to indicate a different vibe entirely. I made a short a little while ago talking about this theme, and why I thought that it sounded the way that it did, but I didn't really come to a solid conclusion there. I think my favorite theory is that this is a theme that highlights the beauty of what Bilewater once was, and it's a remnant of the paradise that existed before the waste of the putrefied ducts of the Citadel overran it. The music itself sounds mysterious and captivating, drawing you into an area that sounds like it should be beautiful, but maybe not welcoming. This feels like a dangerous paradise, one that you should tread carefully in, but still recognize what it once was and what it could be. This track gets full marks in every area. It's thought-provoking, catchy, you could throw it on repeat, and it elevates the in-game experience of BioWater to such a huge degree that it actually made the area bearable on my first playthrough. If nothing else, that might be its greatest achievement. Scarsinger Carmelita has one of the coolest lead-ups to a boss fight I've ever experienced, just straight up. Hearing her singing from the outside of an arena and then having to go around to enter into the Coliseum before challenging her was such an insane feeling. The music hits, the boss is incredible, and the fact that she's the one singing elevates it so much. This gives the same vibes as Marissa from the City of Tears, if Marissa was also debatably the coolest boss in the game and had sick dance moves. From a compositional standpoint, the singing obviously takes center stage, but the supporting cast of instruments all blend together perfectly and do so much to create a level of hype that's difficult to match. The only negative thing that I could possibly say about this track is that the experience listening to it outside of the game isn't quite as cool, but I do still enjoy the re-listen every time, and it's so cool in-game that it more than makes up for it. Props to Team Cherry for creating such an amazing boss experience, and props to Christopher Larkin for creating a theme that elevates it to another level. Taking second place overall is a theme that I think an overwhelming majority of the community will put in first, and for good reason. Choral Chambers is one of those tracks that just make a game. This is the City of Tears for Silksong, and don't get mad at me if I tell you it might be even better. The track just adds layers one after another, and it sounds beautiful even before the horn comes in. Once that happens though, it's over. This music is just peak. The craziest part is Christopher Larkin isn't even done yet. He keeps it going with idea after idea for 2 more minutes, and it's just captivating. Similar to Songclave, this is a track that I could easily get an amazing experience out of both actively and passively listening to it, and I just have one single complaint. I wish so badly that you could hear the track clearly in-game at just a single point. Just one. In-game, it sounds amazing, but also muffled and echoey, like you're hearing it from a distance. In the official OST, it sounds crystal clear, and in my opinion, a lot better. That's it. I just wish there was one room where the wool got pulled out of your ears, and you gotta hear it the exact way that it is in the official release. Other than that, the track is so beautiful, and the only reason that it didn't get first is because the biggest moment in the game creates the opportunity for the greatest music, and in this case, Christopher Larkin delivered my favorite track in the entirety of Silksong. Lost Lace is how you do a final boss theme. Or rather, it's how Christopher Larkin does a final boss theme. I don't think many in the world can do it like him. This theme is just absolutely insane, and as soon as I heard it fully for the first time while fighting Lost Lace, I was completely captivated. It starts out with a dramatic feeling, but nothing too crazy. Then the melody comes in, and it starts to hit you in the feels a little bit, and then it starts the violin solo around 50 seconds, and it goes up a whole nother level again. This solo is so intense, and full of so much emotion, and then you come out of it into this insanely epic endgame melody that gives another almost indescribable feeling. That alone would be enough to put it close to the top of my entire list. This little motive that Christopher Larkin uses is one of my favorites in the whole game. Then the second phase starts. Lost Lace is a boss that deserves a powerful, heartbreaking theme. A theme that manages to capture the tragedy of what has happened. The hope for Hornet to try to save Lace from the void, the pain of the entire kingdom all coming down to this very moment, and what this boss got is a theme that does all of that and more. For me, this might just be the most powerful piece I've ever heard from Christopher Larkin, and it comes in the perfect place. I can't express enough how hard this hit as I played through the boss for the first time. It was enough to instantly give me chills every time I heard the theme for a solid week after. This entire OST is a true work of art, but at this point in time, Lost Lace is without a doubt my favorite track from the entirety of Hollow Knight Silksong. While I have you here, I want to mention that I did buy the official soundtrack on Bandcamp to directly support Christopher Larkin himself, and if you want to do the same, the link is in the description of this video. That's where I downloaded all the music, and obviously Silksong wouldn't even be close to the same without it. Also, there was a whole team of incredibly talented musicians that performed and recorded this OST with actual instruments, so a big shout out to them. This wasn't a solo effort from Chris by any means. Finally, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the soundtrack in the comments, and if you want to support the channel, subscribing is free and it helps out a ton. Thanks everyone. I'll see you next time.